Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, you're checking out an updated solo Templar build for the Elder Scrolls Online. This is going to be our hybrid Paladin build, which uses a combination of two-handed and bow weapon skills along with Templar's really powerful Magicka-based class abilities for a strong solo build that's a lot of fun to play. So if you're interested in the Templar class, but you want to try something a little bit different, then this is the build for you. As usual, we'll be going over everything you need to know to make it work, including the stats, gear set options, skills, champion points, and a basic rotation, and all of that is coming up next. All right, everybody, here we are back on the Templar, this time with something a little bit different. This is going to be our updated hybrid build for the solo Templar, basically combining, stamina-based weapon skills with those Magicka-based class skills for a really fun and unique setup, I think, and pretty powerful for solo play as well. So let's go ahead and jump into some buff stats here on the build and see what we're looking at. As far as our stats here, 25,000 max Magicka, 22,000 max health, and 25,000 max stamina. Of course, your stats are very different on the hybrid setup. 1,200 Magicka recovery, 1,000 health recovery, and about 900 stamina recovery. In terms of our weapon and spell damage, it does go up quite a bit. So just baseline with our buffs, you're looking at about 3,600 spell and weapon damage. That'll be close to 5,000, if not over, once we are fully buffed. 52% spell critical, 43% weapon critical, and our resistances on the Templar do go up quite a bit with our resistance buff. So you're looking at about 23,000 spell resistance and 18,000 physical resistance. In terms of our attributes here, I did split them, though not evenly. So 7 into Magicka, 57 into max stamina. And then in terms of the Mundus Stone, I think the Thief is looking very good if you would like to try out a hybrid build this patch, because that does give us both weapon and spell critical, both together. Very, very nice. I'm going to be using the Gold Food Bewitched Sugar Skulls for as much stats as possible. And then look at all these buffs. We'll talk about how we get these in just a few minutes. Let's talk about the race. For this build, it's important to get spell damage if you can. So I've gone with the High Elf for my hybrid Templar. This, of course, increases our spell damage by 258. You can get a similar buff from the Dark Elf. That's another great hybrid race. Those will be my two top picks. Now, of course, this is not a meta setup. I'm sure you guys know that already. So any race in the game, you can make it work if you want. But you do get some nice max Magicka as a high elf. The spell recharge is also one of my favorites for hybrids because you get back either Magicka or stamina, whichever is lowest. And that does happen every 5 seconds. You also get some reduced damage while channeling, which we will be doing quite a bit on this setup. So high elf overall, pretty awesome for a hybrid Templar setup. Now, in terms of the potion, I would prefer to run tri-stat potions since we are going to be using all of our resources, both stamina and Magicka. And even that extra bit of health recovery is going to help out quite a bit as well. So that's what would be ideal for this build. That's what I would try to get. So that covers all the basics. Let's talk about the gear sets next and what makes this build work. And we'll be starting off with a new set, actually, from the Markarth DLC. This is called the Void Collar set. Light armor set from that new DLC. And here's what it does. You get max health, max Magicka, spell damage. All great stats for a solo build. And then for the 5-piece, when you take damage, your spell damage is increased by 24 for 5 seconds, stacking up to 20 times. And once you get to 20 stacks, the duration is doubled, but then you have to start over. So this is essentially the Magicka version of Warrior's Fury. I actually run Warrior's Fury on my hybrid Dragonite build, so I want to give this a try on the hybrid Templar, and it works actually really well. Now, this is not a great DPS set. This is going to be ideal for soloing, okay? Since, obviously you have to take damage in order for this effect to actually work. So in terms of solo sets, it's actually pretty cool. Now you can run this a variety of ways. The way I've chosen to do it is just to pick up my weapons of the Void Collar set. So I'm going to run Greatsword on the front bar, bow on the back bar, and then 3 pieces on the body. That's the new Void Collar set. In terms of the front bar weapon, Greatsword will be ideal for your hybrid setup. That's because due to those passives, Greatswords actually buff Magicka and stamina-based abilities, letting all of those do more damage. So Greatsword is always the best choice if you can get it. If not, you can make do with an axe or a maul, that's perfectly fine. Precise as the enchant, I think, is going to be best in slot here. Again, just because this buffs both weapon and spell critical, which is tough to get on hybrids. So I think that's a really good trait to get if you can. And then Absorb Magic on the front bar enchant. In terms of that back bar weapon, we are using a bow. Infused bow is going to be important because, again, that's going to give you as much weapon and spell damage as possible whenever that glyph fires, which should be about every 5 seconds. And then, like we mentioned, 3 pieces on the body, so I just have Voidcaller hands, legs, and feet. Again, this is a light armor set from the Markarth DLC. Check it out. It's pretty cool. Next up, we're running Pelinal. Pelinal is the go-to set for hybrids still in ESO. It gives you some okay stats, max health, stamina, and magicka recovery, but the reason why it's really helpful for hybrids is it does make your spell and weapon damage the highest of the 2 values. So in this case, I'm putting all my stats into spell damage. And in fact, the Templar has a unique passive for spell damage, minor sorcery, which gives them an extra 10% spell damage. So the fact is we can stack spell damage the highest of any class on the Templar. And then because we're able to stack that really high, we can actually convert that over to weapon damage as well. So now we have both equal spell and weapon damage, and all of our abilities are really strong. So this is a crafted set. It's a little bit tricky to get because it is 9 traits. But if you are interested in hybrid builds, I would definitely recommend you invest in that or get somebody to craft it for you because it's very helpful. Now, as far as the 5 pieces, heavy chest is going to be nice. Remember, our Voidcaller is light armor, so the fact that we get those extra resistances from running heavy is very good. With that, we're just running the light waist and then 3 pieces of jewelry. Now, in terms of the jewelry, again, remember we are stacking spell damage in this case, so infused, Pelinal, ring, and necklace, all with spell damage. That's going to be your best in slot trait because that's going to give you as much spell damage as possible. So we've got 5 pieces of Pelinal, 5 pieces of the new Voidcaller set. And then for the monster set, it's really up to you. But one of my favorite monster sets on the Templar is actually Mother Seeonit. This gives us max magicka. And then for the 2-piece bonus while in combat, casting an ability with a cast or channel time gives you a damage shield for free. 6,000 damage shield for 6 seconds is pretty strong. And whenever the shield breaks, you also restore magicka, which is really nice sustain-wise for this build. This is an amazing monster set. If you don't have it, it's okay. You can run something like Iceheart. Iceheart will give you extra critical plus the same amount of damage shield, so it's actually pretty good as well. But just the extra recovery on this piece makes it really valuable, I think, for this hybrid setup. Now for this, I am running 1 piece of medium. You can really run it on the head or the shoulders, but I just happen to have a medium head and then a light shoulder. So if you're keeping track, we are running 5 light on this build, 1 heavy chest, and 1 medium helmet. That just lets us do 5-1-1 to maximize those stats if you have Undaunted unlocked. In terms of the trait, we do want Divines on everything. That's going to maximize that Mundus Stone. And then for the enchants, I am running a couple of tri-stat enchants. I think it's really good on this setup. So if you can afford it, tri-stats on the head, chest, and legs, just to get as much stats as possible. And then just max magicka on everything else should be good. So that is, again, the setup. Pelinal, we're running Voidcaller, and then Mother Seeonit. Let's move on over to the skills that make it work, starting with our front bar. Again, this is the 2-hander. And we're going to start off with a magicka ability. Radiant Glory is the Templar class execute. One of the best executes in the game, which is why it's really cool to run this on a hybrid build still. It does great damage. The lower health your enemy is, the more damage it does. And we get some nice passives from it as well. This does count as a channeled ability, by the way, so this also does proc Mother Seeonit. It also procs our High Elf passive, so really good skill to run on your front bar. Combining that, we are running a 2-handed ability called Brawler. That's going to be the 3rd skill here, and this is just another damage shield. So remember, we have that damage shield already from our monster set. We're going to be combining that with a free damage shield from Brawler. Just makes soloing super easy. This does increase the more enemies you hit, so that is pretty nice as well. Next up, Repentance. This is from the Restoring Light skill line, and this is basically our stamina sustain. We talked a lot about magicka sustain. We're getting that from our monster set. Well, Repentance is an amazing skill for stamina sustain. If you are clearing your way through dungeons, if you're trying an arena like VMA, or the Vatistrand Hollows Arena, Repentance is a really good skill. Now, not only that, while slotted, you can see at the bottom there, you gain all of the minor buffs, minor fortitude, minor endurance, and minor intellect, which now increases health, stamina, and magical recovery by 20%. This is actually really nice for hybrids, you guys. They increased all the recovery buffs in the Markarth DLC, both the minor and the major buffs. So we have that on the front bar. If you combine that with a tri-stat potion on the front bar, yeah, that's pretty good recovery. That's really nice for a hybrid setup. So I definitely like that skill. Next up, let's talk about our main spammable. Now, this is a hybrid build, right? So Templars have a great spammable. You could choose either one, but I think since we are a hybrid, it makes sense to run the Magicka version. Magicka version is just a little bit stronger, of course, because it heals you for a percentage of the damage done. So 42% of the damage we do with Puncturing Sweep, we get back as a heal. So since this build needs really strong healing to solo well, then Puncturing Sweep is the morph that makes sense. That's the Magicka morph. And then finally, our last normal ability is going to be Camouflage Hunter, just from the Fighters Guild skill line. Second to last ability here, and this is just a passive, really. While slotted, you gain Major Savagery, so that's extra weapon critical. Plus, you also gain Minor Berserk if you happen to flank an enemy while you do critical damage. So critical is always kind of an issue for hybrids. I like to get both buffs if I can, both spell critical and weapon critical. Can be a challenge to do depending on the build, but this makes it work for the Templar, and we'll talk about how we get the Magicka version spell critical with another ability. So that's what I would run there. Now on the front bar, you do have plenty of options. I like running Temporal Guards still. For the damage shield that you get, free damage shield while blocking makes sense on a solo build because when a boss is about to hit you with a huge heavy attack, you're going to block anyway, and then you'll be able to mitigate a lot of that damage with the Psijic Order damage shield. Of course, if you don't have that, you can run anything you want. Here, I'd recommend one of the morphs of Radial Sweep, either one that you want there. Let's talk about the back bar, bow. Now, for a hybrid build, on your back bar, you'll want either a bow or a staff. I just went with the bow because I thought it fit like a warrior/paladin theme. On this setup, you can make it work just as well with a staff if you'd like. First up, let's talk about Dawn's Wrath. Two abilities here work really well for a single target boss fight. If you're soloing world bosses or dungeons, something like that, and you're up to the main boss, what I would recommend in that case is a skill called Vampire's Bane. This does a lot of really nice damage over time, but it also gives us that spell critical buff that I was talking about. So every time you cast this, you get that buff for free. And then remember, on the front bar, we're getting our weapon critical for free from running Camouflage Hunter. So those two skills running together works really well. That gives us a lot of extra bonus critical. Now, again, that is single target, so if you're trying to clear out a lot of enemies through a dungeon, or if you're grinding for experience, this skill is kind of useless. In that case, I would switch it up with Solar Barrage. Solar Barrage is an AoE damage effect. It also gives us Empower, which increases our light and heavy attack damage. Now, both of these are good because Dawn's Wrath passives are really good. We'll talk about those in a minute. So I would just adjust this based on whatever you're fighting. Next up, Caltrops. Let's talk about Razor Caltrops for a minute. This is from the Alliance War. It's the second to last ability here. And really, I'm using this for not damage, but for my armor debuff. So this was updated for the Markarth DLC as well, and it now applies Major Breach, which debuffs both physical and spell resistance, and it is AoE. So this is massive. This is a huge debuff. If you're fighting multiple targets or even just a single target, everything now in this area is debuffed. So it's absolutely essential to making the build work. Now, that being said, if you don't have Alliance War skills leveled that high, you can substitute something else for that. In the Templar class skill line, the other morph of Repentance does give Major Breach. So you can switch up the build if you want to. If you don't have access to Caltrops, you could morph this the other way, and then you could unlock that debuff as well. But just keep in mind that Major Breach debuff is really, really helpful, especially for hybrids now, because it debuffs both physical and spell resistance. There's another skill that gives that from the Destruction Staff skill line called Elemental Drain. You could go with that as well if you don't have access to Caltrops. Well, in this build, I'm really just trying to balance my Magicka and Stamina abilities. You can see I have one ability costs Magicka, the next one Stamina, Magicka, Magicka, Stamina, Stamina, Magicka. So I'm trying to balance everything as well as I can, and Caltrops just kind of fit in really well with how I wanted to set this build up, so it works. Next, let's talk about Endless Hail from the bow skill line. Endless Hail is really just here for the weapon and spell damage glyph on my back bar. Every 5 seconds, that's going to proc, gives me a ton of weapon and spell damage for free, as long as I keep this on the ground. So it's really helpful. I do recommend keeping it up as much as possible. And then Degeneration from the Mages Guild skill line. Let's talk about why this is important. Very important to the build as well. This comes right here, second ability, Mages Guild. It does pretty good magic damage, single target over 12 seconds, but it also gives you major sorcery, increasing your spell damage by 20%. Templars do not have a class buff that gives them that effect, so it's really important to get this somehow. On a DPS build, you might just run a spell power potion. That's really easy to do. But on the hybrid build, we don't really want to run spell power potions. We want to run tri-stat potions, so we're sustaining all of our attributes. So in this case, running Degeneration on the Templar makes sense. Again, we are stacking spell damage, not weapon damage. So this is going to make our spell damage as high as possible, meaning that with Pelinal, with all the other buffs we have to spell damage, like the Void Collar set, we're going to have both very high spell and weapon damage. So it's going to work really nicely on this setup. And then last but not least, Channeled Focus is our last buff on the back bar. That is also a Templar class skill from Restoring Light. It's another source of Magicka sustain. 240 Magicka back every 1 second is really good. Plus, this is our defensive buff. So as long as you are in this rune, you get not only your major resistance buff, but 50% extra resistances. That means as a light armor build, those resistances, yeah, that's actually pretty good. So that's going to help you mitigate a lot of damage when you're playing solo. Now for the back bar ultimate, speaking of mitigating damage, if you have a really tough encounter, I would definitely recommend Solar Disturbance from the Dawn's Wrath skill line. This isn't as powerful as it has been in the past. That's because Major Maim saw a significant nerf in the Markarth DLC, but this does have a very nice long duration, so it can still be helpful, especially for starting a fight with a lot of adds. It'll give you time to deal with those adds while taking 10% less damage. Now, if the fight is purely single target, then Ballista is very nice for just the extra single target damage over 5 seconds. It is a cheaper ultimate to cast as well. So that's what I would recommend in that case. All right, so how do we make this actually work in a rotation? Let's check that out. So as far as the buffs, pretty simple. Just keep your rune on the ground. Try to stand in it if you can. And then we'll use Degeneration, and then all of our back bar dots. So Endless Hail, Caltrops, got Vampire's Bane. Bar swap, do Brawler really quick for that free damage shield, and then Puncturing Sweep about 3 or 4 times there. And then back to the back bar, refresh those dots. Refresh our buffs because those are down. Degeneration, our focus, and again, Brawler, 3 to 4 sweeps. Make sure you use your potion when it's ready. Before bar swapping back, sometimes it can be helpful to throw in a another Brawler if you want. So my ultimate's ready. I'll go ahead and fire that off here. Front bar, Brawler, keep my sweep up while my ultimate's going off. You can see, pretty simple. My sustain is working fine as well. Got plenty of resources here, so I'm just going to keep it up. Do a couple extra sweeps this time. Brawler before switching back. Keep my dots up. Degeneration. Stay inside my rune. Brawler again. Getting close to execute range, so probably the next rotation. After I come back from the back bar, I will start executing. Should be good to go. One more Brawler and then execute. You probably have to go one more time here. Make sure my debuffs are still on. Oh, my ultimate's ready too. Make sure to do Caltrops. There we go. Super easy. All right, so we saw the rotation. Let's talk about the passives. What do you need on this build to make it work? Under Aedric Spear, these are pretty good. Piercing Spear does give you 10% critical damage. That's great on your front bar. Spear Wall as well gives you minor protection while you are using an Aedric Spear ability. So that means every time we're using Sweep, you can see we have a free minor protection buff. That doesn't matter if you have Temporal Guard, but it's still nice if you don't. Burning Light, of course, this procs every time you do 4 quick hits of your Adrix Spear abilities. So that basically is just puncturing sweep. You'll get free damage from that, which is really nice. Then Balanced Warrior, not so useful on this because we're stacking spell damage instead of weapon damage, but the extra spell resistance is worth 2 points, definitely. Now, Dawn's Wrath, Enduring Rays, you do want this for the extra duration of your abilities. And then Prism, you do get some extra ultimate back, which is great. But Illuminate, this is what we talked about in terms of stacking spell damage on the Templar class. Anytime you cast a Dawn's Wrath ability, you get Minor Sorcery for 20 seconds, increasing your spell damage by 10%. So that's really helpful on this build because we're using Pelinal. So casting Radiant, casting Solar Barrage, casting Vampire's Bane, even your ultimate, those will all give you access to Minor Sorcery, which is so strong on this build. So make sure you put 2 points there. Then Restoring Spirit reduces all of our cost. Awesome passive. Make sure you get that too. Under Restoring Light, most of these affect healing, but some are helpful for soloing. Say the best one probably is Sacred Ground. So while you are standing in your rune, right here, you can see that little green buff that we get. That is Minor Mending. That comes from the Sacred Ground passive, so that's 8% healing done. That will affect like the healing back from our sweep, so that's probably the best one that I would pick in that skill tree. Now, of course, you will want all your two-handed and your bow passives since we're relying on those 2 weapon skills for this build. All your light armor passives, these are important as well. You have things like cost reduction and magicka recovery. You have extra spell resistance, extra spell critical, and spell penetration. That's going to be important when we talk about champion points as well. Guild skills, I'd say the most useful are going to be Psijic Order, Concentrated Barrier, if you have this. If you have Temporal Guard as the ultimate, make sure you're putting 2 points here because this is a free damage shield, and that's a lot of damage to be absorbed, so that's really nice. And then if you have Undaunted, you're going to want to put 2 points here for Undaunted Metal. Check out those max stats. 6% extra magicka, stamina, and health is really good on hybrid setups. So I would recommend that. That's why we're using 5 pieces of light, 1 heavy, and 1 medium to get as much as possible from that. Of course, you will want all your racial passives and then Alchemy Medicinal Use. This makes your potions last 30% longer, which is really helpful on this build as well. Let's talk about champion points here in the green tree. How do we make this work? Again, champion points are probably one of the most challenging things about hybrid builds because the way most champion points buff either magicka abilities or stamina abilities, not both. So kind of the rule I follow is find the champion point nodes that buff both sides of my build and focus on those. So you'll see that in a couple minutes. But in the green tree, 23 into Warlord, 100 Arcanist, 100 Mooncalf. That's just to boost my recoveries as much as possible. I even have 27 here into Healthy because why not? Extra health recovery is good. 20 into Shadow Ward for the block cost reduction. Blue Tree, 23 into Bless. That will buff the heal we get from Puncturing Sweep. And then all of our magic damage will be buffed by Elemental Expert, so 43 points there. Nothing into Spell Erosion because light armor builds have that extra 4/8/8/4 spell penetration from the light armor passives that basically is greater than anything you would put in here, so you can save points in Spell Erosion. 61 into Master at Arms. This affects both magicka and stamina-based direct damage attacks. That's why this is great for hybrid builds. So not only will this buff, like Puncturing Sweep, it'll also buff Brawler. So really nice there. 56 in the Thaumaturge because, of course, that buffs all of our damage over time effects. 43 into Mighty for the increased physical damage. And then 44 into Piercing. This is going to help buff our physical penetration. And basically, remember, I didn't need that for my magicka abilities because I'm wearing light armor. But that's only for light armor. I need the extra penetration for the physical. So points there. Makes sense. In the red tree, 81 for Ironclad. 49 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. 34 Thick-Skinned, 1 left over in light armor, and then 56 into Bastion. That buffs all of our damage shields, of which we have, 3 on the front bar? Yeah, Brawler, we've got the Monster set, and then blocking with Temporal Guard, we have 3 damage shields. So 20% bonus to all of those is actually really helpful. In terms of the outfit style, if you're curious about the look of this build, let's go over it really quickly. So under armor styles, these are all heavy armor styles for the chest and shoulders. That's going to be the Apostle style. That's from Clockwork City. And then everything else, so helmet, legs, feet, hands, and waist. That's another heavy armor set. That is the Aldemiri style. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap up our solo hybrid Templar build, the Paladin. Hope you guys enjoyed this one and you found it informative and interesting. Of course, if you did, don't forget to crush that like button and make sure you're subscribed right here for many more build videos just like this one. And if you'd like to support the channel further, there'll be links to my social media as well as the new website down below. Speaking of the website, there is a written version of this build now updated for Markarth. That's over on the website as well, so make sure you check that out if you have any questions. As always, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.